Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, when we examine both threats, many of them, and promising developments, not enough of those, regarding your individual liberty, as we're joined by our guardian of such, our guardian of individual liberty, LibertyNation.com, legal affairs editor, and, of course, constitutional lawyer, Scott David Cosenza. Hello,
wow.
Scott.
I feel so great now, Tim. Boy.
I just want to make sure you give me a good segment,
so
I build you up, so you won't let me.
Make that my alarm on my phone in the morning.
If I build you up, then I figure you won't let me down.
There you go.
Well, the nation, Scott, has been horrified by something that happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the event itself, by the aftermath of it. Take us through what happened and the immediate response, both in terms of the community and the country.
We're talking about the killing of Mr. Floyd, it looks like the killing of Mr. Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department. It's so early, Tim, that I think it's ridiculous to suggest we should do anything other than investigate, put all the cops on the shelf to be sure in terms of suspension so they're not on the street. But also the idea that they were fired and arrested, it seems like probably the people who did so haven't even examined all the video that has been taken to understand what happened. And maybe you say that the video doesn't need to be examined for the cop who had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. But for the other three cops, it might be helpful to understand what they thought was going on.
But I mean, it's all, at this point, it's all the political pressure that's guiding.
Like you say, it's the bonfire of the vanities, right?
It really is.
Comes out, it's a red ball case, and these politicians will do, they'll do whatever they can to survive the next sort of 20 minutes.
Scott, I fear the day that the cop, at least the cop who put his knee on Floyd's neck, is exonerated, because if that happens, I fear there will be open racial warfare in the country.
I'm going to have a piece in LibertyNation.com published soon, Tim, that discusses why I believe that William Roddy Bryant, who was arrested for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, will be released because of overcharging his instance. And it's that kind of thing that we need to guard against in terms of, the Twitter mob wants them all charged with first-degree murder right away. It's like, well, that may be a bit rich, even in the case where a man has lost his life seemingly under totally needless circumstances.
How you get an impartial jury in a progressive city like Minneapolis with a young progressive and aggressive mayor, I don't see how you can have a fair trial, really, even at this point.
We're a bit far removed from that. So we're just going to take the long game and just say, one thing is for sure, though, burning down just stores and looting and rioting are not the actions of the people who care about civil rights in this country. They're the actions of people who are just taking advantage of lack of enforcement in order to just do what they want. And
cutting off their nose to spite their face by burning down their own communities. This is almost as shocking as the police incident itself.
Or the communities of others, by the way. There are plenty of suburban white Antifa kids that are downtown acting tough.
You bet.
Yeah.
With their masks on. Of course, Antifa must be on the rise now because everybody's wearing masks. I guess they could go out there and say, we finally won the argument. Everybody's wearing masks like we do.
Roger that.
I don't want to make light of them, but... Okay, so, Scott, President Trump and Twitter have now all but declared war on each other. Twitter, for the first time, applying a fact check to a political ad, Trump's, about mail-in balloting, which was Trump's opinion, not a fact, not presented as such. But now, Trump has reacted by signing an executive order which could greatly limit Twitter's ability to fact check and perhaps many other things.
Well, more importantly, it's the removal or modification of immunity that they hold under Section 230C of the Communications Decency Act. And it just seems like this is a punitive measure that Donald Trump is visiting upon Twitter because he didn't like the way they behaved towards his account. And it really smacks him of the worst kind of impulse that a person in power can have, which is to use their power to punish people who annoy and frustrate them rather than for the good of the people.
What are the chances that this executive order can run the gauntlet of the federal court system when there's real issues of abridgment of free speech at play here?
Well, almost certainly, Tim. I believe there is a member of the federal judiciary who's willing to impose an intergalactic stay on any enforcement of this kind of ruling, just because we see the way that any Trump initiative has been treated in the federal courts. That's the smart money bet. That said, though, there will be appeals and it'll go forward, and we'll see what the ultimate rulings are. But the likelihood is very small that this will just simply go through,
Right.
Without a hitch.
And we may not get enforcement by the people that need to enforce such an executive order.
So the enforcement in this instance, Tim, it seems to be most of the enforcement will come from executive agencies and the Federal Trade Commission and some others that maybe have like quasi, status. So I wouldn't be so sure. It's not like the FBI is going to be involved. It's going to be complaint by harassment and and this is what makes it kind of really awful, I think, in terms of a civil liberties perspective. These are the kinds of agency fees and fines that you and I would be railing on if it, usually given to some like small business owner who didn't do enough to make sure that somebody didn't wear a mask in a store, or just some regulations that you and I would think this is the federal government putting a regulation on somebody else. And those types of fees are, they may be easy to beat if you're Twitter and have a high-powered law firm behind you, but if it's selling apples on Main Street, good luck. And so for that reason, I think it's no comfort for them.
Well, it seems to me that what Trump is doing here is sending a shot across the bow at Twitter. He's saying, okay, I'm going to fight back because I never take a punch without giving one back. And he may also be just trying to get Twitter to come to the table and maybe dial back on some of the excesses of their obvious left-wing bias. What the president said turns what you just said on its head. And this is his defense of it. The quote that he gave before signing the document: "We're here today to defend free speech from one of the greatest dangers," is what he's talking about, bias. But of course, free speech does not apply to private actors. It applies to public speech. Now, before we go, we've got to talk about what's happened in Hong Kong, because it's a real tragedy. We've got millions of people in one of the bastions of free market capitalism that's left on the planet, and it's now essentially going to be annexed by the People's Republic of China, which had the one country, two systems for the longest time. And now Hong Kong's basically going to be folded into the broader nation.
It looks like it, Tim. At every turn, they tighten their grip on the free. And, you focused on economic terms, which is important, but also we're talking about people who have much more in the way of cultural freedom than their fellow countrymen on the mainland of China. So all of the art, the speech, the news, the day-to-day is much more free there. And the Chinese government can't abide it. Listen, you can't have a system where those guys get to have freedom, but not these guys. That doesn't work. How can they, if the existence of their regime depends on using their boot on the neck of the people, that they're going to have to do that countrywide.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.